Hello everyone and welcome to the other match of the Goldmoney Asian Rapid Knockouts. So we're in the semifinals and it's Vladislav Artemiev versus Ding Liren, and much like Levon Aronian, Artemiev also lost the first match. So now he needs to win the second match in order to force tiebreaks and then try to maybe eliminate Ding in the tiebreaks. If not in the Blitz section, then maybe in Armageddon. And it was a really intense match, and this is I think the highest quality game of the match. Because in the second match, the first game started by them drawing the game. Then Artemiev won the game and he bounced back into the match. But then Ding won the third game, and then again Artemiev is in a must-win situation. So this is game 4 of the rapid section, and Artemiev simply must win to force tie breaks and somehow get back into the match. And it's always unpleasant being in a must-win situation, but at least you have the white pieces, and the opening he chooses and the way he plays is most interesting. So let's see how it went for him. So without further ado, let's check it out. Artemiev with the white pieces opens with d4. We have knight to f6, b4, we have d5, and now e3. He goes for the London system setup. We have c3 by Ding, and knight to c3 now. We have c captures on d4, e captures, and now a6. So this has been played many times. Nothing new here. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, and now knight to e5. And this is something the London players use very often. They will shift this knight over to e5, and if they feel very aggressive, then the knight and queen, as you can see, guard the g4 square. So you can already start pushing g4, g5, h4, h5, and it's sort of a barbarian type of thing to do. But when you're in a must-win situation, you could go for something like this. And black might even consider capturing here on e5, but it's a very unambitious idea for black. For example, if d captures, you're going to lose this pawn if you move the knight, so you have to go into this d4 line, and then after e captures, we're going to trade queens. We have captures, and now after, f captures on g7, we're going to capture, not g7, but you could also capture on e7, so the bishop doesn't grab hold of this diagonal. Bishop captures or king captures, and then we're going to capture on c3, and it's going to be it's going to be a much better position for white. Both players still have the bishop pair, and yes, white's pawns are doubled, but I'm sure there's a very good reason for Ding not to do this, as it's still a pawn up. So however you put it, and I'm not saying Ding wouldn't be able to draw this, but it's not the way to play chess. So instead, bishop to d7, he just continues developing, and now we have a very interesting move. Here, known moves are something like queen to d3. You could also continue with bishop to e2, maybe push a pawn, but here we have the early g4, and it's not a new move. It has been played once, but now the g4 square nicely defended by the knight and by the queen. You are preparing to dislodge the knight further on with g5 and so on. So here there is a game where knight captures on e5 was played, but here Ding says, I'm not very impressed with your g4 move. He just plays e6, and it is now as of move 8 that we have a completely new game. So Artemiev continues with his plan. We have g5. Now he trades on e5, knight captures on e5, and now we have bishop captures on e5. If you continue with g captures on f6, then we can just play knight to g6, and this only helps black. You're going to lose the pawn now, otherwise you can play something like captures, but again, this only helps black develop, and black will be perfectly fine here. So instead, after knight captures on e5, we have bishop captures, and now knight back to g8. We have queen to h5, full barbarian mode on, as now that you see the bishop here, the queen here, the bishop coming to d3, it could be very scary. But the Ding says, again, not very impressed. Knight to e7, and now bishop to d3. We have knight to c6, Ding just continues developing, and now we reach the position from the thumbnail. Artemiev pushes g6, and this is just a wonderful position. Point is that the g6 pawn should not be captured. If you capture it, it's not going to be good for you. Of course, if you capture with this pawn, then you lose the rook. And if you capture with the f pawn, well, then we just capture with the bishop, and you are getting checkmated here. H captures, queen captures, you're going to play king to e7. Now comes knight captures on d5 with check, and the black king has no squares. You have to capture the knight, and after you do this, then we have this beautiful bishop queen checkmate, as there is nowhere for the black king to go. So this is definitely in the position, but the Ding, of course, not about to fall for such a cheap trick. He goes knight captures on e5, and okay, d captures on e5, and now this shows you how how crazy this position is and how wonderful the London system can be if used properly. Ding's knowledge of theory ends here as he plays queen to e7, but here you actually have to go into f captures on g6, and I'm just going to show this to you because it's a super fun line, because you know bishop captures on g6 is coming, so there's really no reason to play this, but this is the strongest move. That's how sometimes chess works, but I will show it. F captures, bishop captures with check, and now we give up the rook. H captures, queen captures, and now we play d4. We dislodge this knight, now we free this diagonal for our bishop, we can bring the queen into the game with check, so a lot of possibilities here. So knight to e4, white is very happily coming with the knight to d6, but we don't care, just bishop to c6, attack the knight, and if the knight moves the rook, so knight to d6 with check, but now we're gonna play king to d7. And here, what do you play? Well, there are a couple of things you could play. You could play something like rook to g1, but that's not very ambitious for white. Just queen to a5 with check, and now you see that the white king doesn't really have all that many squares. You have to play king to f1, and then it's just ugly. So instead, what you could do is just castle, decide to give a little bit of material back. This is considered strongest for white, but then queen to g5 with check, and now we just eliminate the e5 pawn. King b1, queen captures on e5, now attacking the knight, and only when the knight moves, now we can play queen to c5, and we get this position where black is up the exchange, but white is up the exchange, but black is considered better here. Since you have to move the knight, then we can start advancing the pawns, and it's well, it's just very ugly. If b3, we can play b5 and so on. But just wanted to show you how crazy you know, sometimes the strongest idea may be. But Ding played queen to e7, and now Artemiev just castled queenside. Ding also castled queenside, and he allowed the capture of this f7 pawn, but he doesn't care, he's gonna win it back. So g captures on f7, we have g6 now attacking Artemiev's queen, and now bishop captures on g6, and now bishop to g7. So this is how Ding gives back a little bit of material to activate his pieces. So bishop back to d3. Now the bishop is hanging as the rook is nicely defended here. So bishop back to d3, and now rook d to f8. With a double attack on the pawn here, we have knight to e2, and now just queen captures on f7. And now Ding grabbed the f7 pawn. Artemiev exchanges queens here. We have, as the f2 pawn is hanging, so you could play f4 maybe, but if you go f4 to defend it like this, then you blunder your queen, so you can't do that. So here we have a trade, captures, and now f4. And if you look at the position now, it's 6 pawns to 5, so Artemiev is up a pawn, but again, Ding has the bishop pair, he's not all that worried about this. So how can Vladislav do anything to cause some problems, you know, to maybe create some complications in the position? It's not going to be easy, but it is his last hope, because if he doesn't win this, then it's Ding to the finals to face Levon Aronian. So here we have bishop to h6. He knows that he's going to win this pawn because it's pinned. The king is on c1, and now the other rook is coming here. So Ding is even winning the pawn, but there's the problem of the h7 pawn. However, again, Ding is not worried. So rook f to d1, that's not a rook d to f1, defending here, but now just rook h to f8 with a triple attack here, and now king to d1, unpinning. But now Ding just eliminates this pawn. So rook captures, we have rook captures, knight captures, rook captures, and now bishop captures on h7. And now again, Artemiev is up a pawn, it's a passed h pawn, but Ding plays rook h4, and he says that that pawn is not going anywhere. So bishop back to d3, and now another very important move, d4. We have to free this diagonal for our light square bishop, and then it's just going to be very good for us. We have h3. Now you know this is coming, so you have to free up this square for the rook. Bishop to c6, and now rook to h2. And now again, we have king to d7. Ding starts bringing his king into the game because that's what you do when you're in an endgame. And bishop to f1, defending the pawn here. So now the rook can once again be activated. We have bishop to e4 and now rook to d2, attacking this pawn. But now a nice trick by Ding, king to c6. Now saying, okay, if you grab this pawn, then I'm going to play bishop f3 check, and then I'm going to pick up the rook, and I win. So Artemiev has to unpin. He plays king to e1. Now there is a threat of just capturing this because the king is no longer in the line of check. And now comes bishop to f5 by Ding. And this is a This is a very interesting decision by Ding. Okay, it's going after the h3 pawn, but bishop here is simply not allowing white to activate his bishop. So while it is possible, Ding's idea is different. He plays bishop to f5, and you'll see later on why Ding plays this and why his vision is as great as it is. So bishop to g2 check, he abandoned this diagonal, so of course Vladislav claims it for himself. King to c5, and now king to f2. We have b5 now. There's always time to grab this pawn, so you don't have to rush this. We have king to g3 attacking the rook, rook to, not h7, but rook to h8. Accidentally dropped the rook there. We have a3, and now comes a5 by Ding. So again, how can you do anything here? It seems like black has such a firm grip on the position that there's simply no way to try anything. We have bishop to f1, now even b4 by Ding. We have captures, and now b3. And now you see what Ding had in mind. Now the bishop here attacks this c2 pawn, which is a backwards pawn. There's no way this pawn is ever reaching the c3 square, and Artemiev will be stuck here guarding it for the rest of the game. So is it time for for Artemiev to just resign and say it was a good match, Ding, thank you? Nope. He will still try. Ding first goes rook to g8 check, king to h2, now rook to h8. Ding is happy with the draw. He says, okay, is there anything you want to try? King g3. Ding repeats, rook to g8 check, and now we have king to f4. So starting to bring the king a little bit deeper into the position. We have rook to f8 by Ding, now threatening some nasty discoveries. Now king to g5 by Artemiev. We have rook to g8, and now king to f6. We have rook to g6 check, now king to e7. And we often say that there's an active king, but there's also a two active king, and this king is, well, extremely active, but it doesn't seem like there's anything for this king to do there. I mean, it's just not attacking anything. It's not being very helpful. What can you do here? We have king to d5 by Ding, and now bishop to c4 check. We have king captures on e5, and now, okay, we trade pawns. Ding will win this pawn after rook to e2 check, king to f4, and now bishop captures on e6. We have bishop captures, and now rook captures on e6. And now it's a very interesting position because, well, it's a rook endgame. Of course, Artemiev is still up a pawn, but what do you play here? There's actually not all that much you can play, and you have to be very careful. There are two moves that are good for black, and no other move is good for black. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the only two moves that are good for Ding while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on not trading rooks. Obviously, we don't trade rooks if we're down a pawn. Well, if you found rook to g2 or rook to g3, then congratulations, you are a most excellent rook endgame player, because only rook to g3 and rook to g2 are good. For those of you who are skeptical, I will show you. If you trade rooks here, then white is just up a pawn. I mean, that's too strong. If you go here, then white will win both of these pawns, then advance his two queenside pawns. And if you go the other way, king e3, maybe trying to win this pawn and then try to advance this one. Now, we don't push the pawn. I know you guys were thinking about pushing the pawn. We play king d5. So now black can't get away from the pawn because he loses this pawn, but there isn't another move because now we simply advance our pawn. If king here, then king captures on c2. Now we're going to defend it and now advance our pawn to victory. So the other thing that I mentioned is rook to g2 is winning because, okay, if rook to g2, there's simply, you're going to win this pawn or you're going to go after this pawn. So not winning it, but not losing. This is a dead draw. Black can never win this, but black must not lose this. So rook to g2, pretty much self-explanatory, and rook to g3 also possible because now, for example, if king d6, we're going to play d3, and now all of white's pawns just get annihilated. C captures, rook captures. We're attacking both of the pawns. Whatever you play, king c5, just rook captures on b3, and this is now a dead draw. However, Ding played one move that is not one of the moves that I described. Ding played rook to g7 check, and now that simply will not do. It doesn't seem like it changes all that much, but chess is ruthless like that. What it actually does is it brings the white king closer to the d pawn, and that's huge in this position. Now, after playing this, Ding now goes back with rook to g2, trying to do the same idea that we discussed, but now the king is already here. The king is not not here. So now king d5 now attacks the d4 pawn. This would never have been possible if, rook to g3 or rook to g2 was played right away. So here, Ding grabs the c2 pawn, but now rook to e4 check. Now the king defends the d4 square, and now the white rook will gobble up all of these pawns, maybe. So king f5, now rook captures on d4. We have rook to c3, and now rook captures on b4. Ding will now claim this pawn, but first rook to d3 check, king c5, rook to c3 check, king d4, and now rook captures on h3. And now white is up only one pawn, and usually when it's a rook's endgame and you're up only one pawn, it's very, very hard to win. In most cases, it's not even possible. But here, rook to b6 by Artemiev, and now you can see that the white king and the rook completely cut off the black king from entering, the side of the board where the passed pawn is at, and there's simply no stopping the passed pawn. The rook alone will not be able to do it. So rook to h1 by Ding, but now b4. We have rook to d1 check, king to c5, now king e5. He did win some squares for the king, but it's not enough. Rook to h6. We have rook to c1 check, king to b6. Now king d5, but now b5. Rook to b1, and now comes king to a6. Now if rook a1, we're going to go here to b7 and then advance our pawn. So king to c5, but now we have rook to c6 with check. You could also just play b6. The pawn can never be captured, but Artemiev decided to do it in a nicer way. Rook to c6 check, king d5, and now rook to c2. Completely cut off the king now from entering the game this way, and now there's simply no stopping the pawn. Rook a1 check, we have king to b7, rook to b1, now comes b6, we have king to d6, and now rook to d2 check. There are many ways you can win this, but Artemiev chooses now the most elegant one. He invites the black king closer to the passed pawn, king to c5, and now even plays king to c7. He says, go ahead, grab my pawn. But of course there is no grabbing the pawn, and it was in this game on move 69 that Ding Liren resigned the game, and Vladislav Artemiev won the second match, which was incredible because he was able to force tie breaks. And in the tie breaks, first game where Ding had the white pieces ended in a draw, but then in the second game where Artemiev again had the white pieces, he was able to win, and he was able to eliminate Ding. So it's really incredible that both Levon Aronian and Vladislav Artemiev came into the match against Magnus and Ding, being down a full match point, they bounced back and they won the tiebreak. So really incredible, and I think we're gonna have an absolutely incredible finals. Levon Aronian versus Vladislav Artemiev. Levon playing probably the most beautiful chess out of all of the players in the top 20, and Artemiev, who's just so powerful. Now he plays also, as you've seen, he just kept pushing those pawns. He kept coming at the Ding, and I think it's gonna be an incredible final match, and it's gonna be a treat for all of us. So here, like I said, you resign because now the pawn is getting promoted, and of course if you capture, then just rook c2 check, and there's no defending the rook. You can defend it one more time, rook b2 check, king moves. We're gonna capture the rook and then just checkmate the king with the king and the rook. So yeah, really incredible stuff. Artemiev bounces back and eliminates Ding. I don't think everyone expected Artemiev to do well, but it's just when Ding plays well, there's just no stopping him. And this game, incredible as it is, Ding played incredible chess, but it simply wasn't enough. Artemiev just kept finding ways to keep the game going, and then all of a sudden, there was that one moment where Ding had the opportunity to make a mistake, and he gave this check. I put the quote above the board. Patzer sees a check, Patzer gives a check, a famous Bobby Fischer quote. Of course, not saying that Ding is a Patzer. I just did it for comic effect. No disrespect to Ding. Of course, Ding is a spectacular player. But I thought it was fitting in this one because you just have to go after the pawns, but then you give a check and then you blunder the game. But yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you today in the finals. Vladislav Artemiev versus Levon Aronian is going to be incredible. I would like to thank David Pierce, Tom Deralau, missing a T there. Sorry, Tom. Lance Hassan, Connor Clark, and James Walker for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing today with the finals of the Goldmoney Asian Rapid. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your weekend.